Today's daf is daf Mem Aleph, and Emir Hashem will make a siyum on Perek Sheni. And on the bottom of daf Mem Amud Beis, we had a case where he incurs three different chiyuvei chatos bevasachas at the same time. He shechted on Shabbos, and therefore he's chayav a carbon chatos for shechita on Shabbos, one of the malachos. And he shechted a an animal for the sake of avodah zarah. So that is the second violation of a chiyuv kares, which generates a chiyuv chatos, and a third because he was bachutz and he's chayiv for avodas chutz, shchutas chutz, and we interpreted that halacha, which is ruled by the brisa, is talking about a case of a chatos ha'of, which only requires one siman. Half of the kana was ripped, was holed, and it's not yet a treifa because chatzi kana, half of the windpipe is still not. So all he needs to do is cut a little bit as he puts the knife into that laceration, that hole. And now, at the very moment that he cuts and severs a drop of the kana, at that point he incurs three different chiyuvim. And this is a reference to chatos ha'of. The implication is that because it's an oath, that's why he could incur all three chiyuvei chatos at the same time. Aval zevach lo. But if it would have been, the word zevach here means an animal. If it would have been an animal that he was makriv, then since he is doing the shechita and the owner of the animal has not actually involved himself in generating this isur of avodah zarah, it's only the shochet who has in mind for avodah zarah. Therefore, we apply the principle of ein adam oser davar she'ein shelo. Now, if you're going to tell me that in a case where you do a maisa, which is a shita of Rav Huna, then you can prohibit somebody else's object, even though it doesn't belong to you, then we should be able to apply the same principle of all three chiyuvim emerging simultaneously, even in a case of chatas behema. So even though in a case of chatas behema, the animal doesn't belong to the shochet, and the shochet is the one who messes up here with the wrong machshava, but nevertheless, if he does a maisa as he does through shechita, then once again the same halacha could apply, that all three chiyuvei chatos emerged simultaneously. So why did the brisa have to use a case of a chatas ha'of and not just the case of a zevach, namely any animal? And the Gemara wants to say now that the principle of ein adam oser davar she'ein shelo would not apply in kachim, in a karbanos. Why? Came into kanyule lekapora kedidei damya. Because we define the ownership over the karban, even in the case of a chatos, which lechora he doesn't own the chatos, it belongs to Hegdesh, but since he owns the kapara power that's inherent in the karban chatos, therefore we consider it kididei dami, as if it was his. And therefore, he can generate a chiyuv and an iser of zivchei mesim, because he's not considered a foreigner, but rather he's considered the owner. Toshma, this is where we got up to yesterday. And we're looking here on Daf Mem Aleph, and we're on line 4. Our Mishnah says, Shnayim ochsen v'sakin, two people are holding on to a knife. One is holding on to the handle, and the other is holding on to the top of the blade. And they shecht shochetim echad l'shum echad mikol elu. One has in mind whether it's the harim or the naharos or the hills, the mountains, the sun, the moon, the stars, etc., etc. The echad l'shum davar kasher. The other one who's shechting has in mind that which is mutter. Shchita so psula. We cannot eat from the shchita because we consider that the shchita of that individual who had in mind for the sake of avodah zarah, for the sake of mountains and hills, he generates an iser zivchei mesim in the basar. Now, apparently, the Gemara assumes that one of the two owns the animal. Now, the one who intended in his shchita for avodah zarah, he didn't own the animal. And yet, nevertheless, we're going to say that his machshava l'shem avodah zarah is going to generate an iser. And that seems to undermine, the principle of ein adam oser davar she'ein shelo. It's not owned by the other one who had the right kosher machshava as an exclusive ownership, but rather it's a partnership, in which case the animal is owned by both of them, and therefore the one who shechts for mountains or hills, l'shem avodah zarah, he is an owner of the animal because he's no less of an owner than the other shutaf, the other partner, and therefore his machshava l'shem avodah zarah would generate an iser of zivchei mesim. Toshma, what about a different Mishnah? This is a Mishnah in Gittin. Let's see if he tells you on what daf. Yadaf Nun Aleph, Nun Beis. And it says there, now we're talking about something called Hezek She'eno Nikar. We'll explain what that means as we go along. Hametame v'amedabea v'amenasech b'shogeg poter v'mezid chayev. Rashi explains that in all these cases, we'll go through the 3 cases, we have what's called a hezek she'eno nikar, which means that there's no physical change in the object. So what happens is that Reuven owns produce, and Shimon comes along, and he's mitame the produce. For example, let's say the produce is truma, then truma tmeah cannot be eaten by anyone. Or he's medamea. He takes truma, which is chulin, and he takes tvua, which is chulin, and he mixes in truma. And now the value on the market of this mixture has gone down because chulin will sell for 100, but truma, because of the law of supply and demand, only Kohanim can buy truma and eat truma, is worth only 50. And now he took his chulin, and by mixing in truma, he reduced the market value of this chulin from 100 to 50. That's called hezek she'eno nikar, because again, you don't see anything damaged. On the contrary, he added something to the mixture. And now we have menaseach, which is someone who takes the wine of somebody and pours it as a libation in front of avodah zarah, generates an iser of zivchei mesim, an iser anoah. But again, there's nothing physically changed in the wine. So according to the Torah law, such a mazik doesn't have to pay, even if he was a mazid. However, the Rabbanon instituted what's called a knas, a penalty, and he'll have to pay damages to the nizak insofar as the value went down. And despite the fact that it's a hezek she'enu nikar, he deserves to be fined for causing it. But if he was a shogeg, let's say, for example, he didn't realize it was so-and-so's wine. He thought it was his own wine, or maybe he didn't realize it was truma, and so forth and so on. In all those cases, the Rabbanan lifted the knas. He's not worthy of any punitive measures, and he's potter. Because then we go back to the Ikar Din that Hezek Shein and Ikar does not generate a chiyuv of Tashlumin Nezikin. So now the question is, I don't get it. How could you tell me that if he was mazid, then he created such a hezek that the Rabbanan instituted a penalty and he has to pay for that hezek? What kind of hezek? Ein adam oser davar she'ein shelo. Achinami dislei shutfis begavra. Again, we have to apply that same answer that we're talking about shutfim. And since he has a shutfis, therefore he can generate an isur. Now the Gemara wants to say that this whole issue of Ein Adam Oser Davar Shein Shelo is in fact Machlokas Tanoim, Tanoim. Ovid Kolchavim Shenisech Yedo Shel Yisrael Shelo B'fnei Ovid Avodas Kolchavim. So there are two strikes here against you. If you want to say that the Jews' wine became Osir B'Torah Yayin Nesach. Number one, who is the Ovid Kolchavim to generate an Isser on the wine that is owned by a Jew? Ein Adam Oser Davar Shein Shelo. And secondly, it was Shelo B'fnei Avodas Kolchavim. The wine was not poured in the presence of the idol. And now we have the Shita of the Tanakama who says Asaro. It is prohibited under Avodah Zarah, which means that Adam Oser Davar Shein Shelo and even Nisuch Shelo B'fnei ha'idol. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Besei, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Matirin also, for two reasons. Number one, Echad, She'ein menaskin yayin Shelo B'fnei Avodas Kolchavim, and you're not chayav for Nisuch unless you do it in the presence of the idol. The Echad, and another reason why they would say that he's potter, that the yayin does not become yayin nesach, is because the Jew can say to the guy, "Lo kol aminich, you don't have the power. Shete aser yeni lionsi, against my will, you want to aser my yayin. Ein od moser davar shein shelo." So it comes out that when we saw in Rav Huna that if a Jew slaughters the animal of another Jew for idolatrous purposes, he renders it forbidden. That's a machlokas tanoim. According to Rabbi Yehuda ben Besei and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, they would say you cannot prohibit somebody else's object. It's not yours. So you did the shechita with the wrong kavana for avodah zarah, but it belongs to the Jew, and therefore you can't ask it. But Rav Huna holds, like those tanoim that we mentioned here, that Ovi Kolchav Shenisach Yain Shel Yisrael is Osro. Rav Nachman v'Rav Amram v'Rabbi Yitzchak Amri Afilu L'madi Omer Odom Oser Davar Shein Shelo Hani Mili Kusi Aval Yisrael L'Tzu'uri Kamachavin. Even if I go with that shita of the Tanakama in the Bryce that we just learned, that a guy who does nisuch on the yayin shel Yisrael will generate an iser on the yayin shel Yisrael, make it into yayin nesach, and adam oser davar shein shelo. That's only with regard to a kusi. A kusi has full intention for idolatry. We take him very seriously. But if a Yisrael says that he's going to perform an act of idolatry with some other Jew's property, then even the Tanakam who holds Adam Oser Davar Shein Shelo would concede that in this case, Ein Adam Oser. Why? Because the Jew is only L'Tziuri Kamachavin. He really has no intention. He has a Cheskes Kashrus as far as he has no intention of worshiping an idol. He's only doing it as a way to needle, to upset the owner of the property. Let him think that his property is prohibited. But he really had no intention for idol worship. Toshma, the Gemara says, wait a minute. What about our Mishnah? Shnayim ochsu b'sakim v'shochetin echel l'shum echel mikol elu echel l'shum davar kashri tasab psula. So you see that if Yisrael shechts another Jew's animal for the sake of avodah zarah, it generates an iser avodah zarah. Why don't you say, let's see, that the Jew really never truly intended to worship Avodah Zarah. He was just doing it to needle the owner. And the Gemara answers, when do we think that Yisrael is not serious about his idol worship, and he's only saying it in order to needle the owner of the animal, means that's only in a regular Yisrael that has a cheskes kashrus, and therefore we don't assume and we don't suspect that he would actually worship an idol. But in a case of Yisrael Mumar, who has a record of rejecting the Torah in favor of idolatry, then when he says, I am doing this, a shechita for the sake of Avodah Zarah, we take him at face value. We don't assume that it's just l'tziyuri kamechame. And that's the case here in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is talking about a Yisrael Mumar. Now, I don't know why the Gemara couldn't have given the old answer of shutfis. That I'm not sure. But in any event, this is the Gemara's answer. Now, what happens in a case of a Yisrael Mumar who shechts an animal that belongs to a Yisrael, or for that matter, even his own animal? And he declares that he's doing it for idolatry. What's the story with the meat of that korban? I shouldn't say korban because we're really talking about Chullin. Is it avodah zarah? So here we have halacha of bedika. Now, bedika really means that we check out his record to see if he has a record of idolatry. The Rashba derives from Rashi that this bedika is only what we call mikan ulahaba, in case this same shochet, this mumar, will shecht again for avodah zarah. But as far as this particular shechita is concerned, he did not yet establish himself as a mumar, and therefore you're allowed to eat from the meat. The Rambam disagrees, and the Rambam says that this bedika, if it proves and establishes that this shochet is in fact a mumar li'avodas kol chavim, then this meat is asur midin zivchei mes. Anyway, Toshma. Let's try to prove from a Mishnah, again, the Mishnah in Gittin, Hametame v'amedame v'amenasech, and again, he's doing it on somebody else's wine or grains, b'shogeg potu v'mezid chayim. And now, why should there be any sort of a hezek, and why did the yayin become yayin nesech? We hold einonim dov oser dov shein shalom, according to those tanoim. Hochanam v'Yisrael mumar, because we're dealing with Yisrael mumar, and we take him seriously. And in such a case, we're going to apply the principle of adam oser dov shein shalom. Amalei Rav Acha brei de Rav Rav Hashi. We have halacha of hasra, which means that before we can be mechayiv someone in onish and bezdin, the violator, the transgressor, has to receive a hasra warning. And the Gemara learns in Sanhedrin that he has to be matir atzmo lemisa. We tell him that if he's about to do what he's about to do, he will incur a chiyuv for a capital crime, and he has to respond and says, Afal pichet, almanas kenan yosa. I know that I'm going to be chayiv, and I'm doing it anyway. So now, in this case, Rav Acha asks Rav Ashi, shouldn't we take him seriously? He was matir atzmo lemisa. You're not going to say l'tziyuri kol mechavin in this case. Amarle. So Rav Ashi responds, Hiter atzmo lemisa kamrid. Ein lecha mumar gadol mizeh. the very fact that he was matir himself lemisa, and he said, Almanas Kain, I hear the warning about a death penalty if I violate this avodah zarah, and he declared, you know what? I realize that I know the repercussions of my actions, that I'm going to do it anyway. In such a case, and for sure, we take him seriously, and we're not going to apply the principle of litziri komachav. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Mem Aleph. And we're talking about Maris Ayin. Ain't shochtin lolitoch yamim, lolitoch naharos lolitoch kelim. Apparently, the idol worshippers used to do a shechita into the sea, or into a river, or into certain vessels, these kelim, and the blood flows into the vessel, and then the Ovdei Avodah Zarah would collect the blood from these vessels and pour them on the idol's altar. And if a Jew does this, even though he has no intention whatsoever for Avodah Zarah, but it looks to the onlooker like, heaven forbid, he's doing Avodah Zarah, so he shouldn't do such a thing. Avol shochedu l'toch uga shel mayim. Now, the word uga has two translations. Either it means a bar. A bar is like a cistern, meaning it's a place where they collect water, right? The rainwater falls in and it's collected. Or the word uga means a circle. So we're going to allow him to shecht litoch uga, even though it's mayim. And the reason for that is that the blood now gets mixed up in the water, and it's not designated for zrika al gabi mizbeach shel ovdei kochavim. Ubisvina. Now, if you shecht on a boat, you don't want the blood to go all over the floor of the boat. Al gabi kelim. Then he's allowed to collect the dam in a keli, but only for cleanliness purposes, to keep the boat in good shape, and therefore the onlooker will certainly understand that he's not doing it for avodah zarah. And a similar halach the Mishnah establishes regarding toch habayis, aval ose guma b'toch beiso b'shvil sheikonis adam l'tocho. If in the privacy of his house he creates this kind of a pit so that the blood from the shechita will collect in the pit and won't go all over his house, then no one's going to suspect him of avodah zarah, and it's mutter. But b'shuk lo yasakein, if he's doing it publicly, then even though in his house he could shecht into the pit, but not in the public. And why not? Says the Mishnah here on the top of Daf Mem Aleph on the base, shelo yechake es hatztukim. Apparently, the tztukim were ovdei avodah zarah, and out in the shuk, everybody sees him shechting into this guma, and nobody cares about the cleanliness of the shuk, and therefore, why is he doing such a thing? Apparently, he's mimicking the practice of the tztukim for avodah zarah, and once again, we've got a problem of marisai.